Hey, Monkey here, back with something a little bit more normal for the channel. So today I wanted to go over DIY sling tips, but with no sewing required. Now, if you do have access to sewing, that opens up more possibilities, but I wanted to show what you can get away with just knowing what to buy and how to use it can really go a long way. Starting off with some webbing classics, we have the MIL-W43668, and this is a classic for pals, Molly gear. The originator for that, and it's a little stiffer than some of the others. Another classic is the MIL-W17337. It's a little bit more flexible. It was normally used on like backpack straps, but then people started to appreciate the flexibilities for PALS webbing. And a slightly newer spec is the AA55301, and especially on this solution dyed, it's more matte and it's a little bit softer to the touch. For an even more modern option, we have the jacquard version of that 55301, and Murdoch made a sweet multicam blend here, where in the past normally it had printed where the sides would get all jacked up and it'd fade, but this stuff's really great. And so these are some starter options that are easy to use. There's other thicker stuff like tubular, but this is a good starting point. For more webbing details, I'm mostly going to be using 1-inch because the hardware is a lot more available. It keeps things simple. That said, I wanted to show 1.25-inch where it's also popular, where it adds just a little bit more width for that weight distribution. Once you get to 1.5 and higher, it's just kind of bulky and no fun. So it's showing that the webbing's usually a little thicker. Also, while here, this is the old printed multicam webbing, and so you get these jacked up edges and fades pretty quick. Now going over common hardware, the old HK snap hook is a good start. HK standing for Heckler & Koch. They've been around for a long time. People like them. Fairly easy to get on and off. However, sometimes people forget that the hole that they're actually made for on HK gear is pretty small. So this is an example where you can put clips on clips and see how that gate can't get in there to be manipulated. And so here's an example. So this actually looks like a good mount point, but you can get all jacked up in certain situations where, see, the gate will push in and you can pop out like that. So if you stick to the right hole, they're pretty safe. Some security concerns, and sometimes eventually the spring can wear out. Little problems like that, but they're still pretty handy. As an evolution to the HK clip came the mash hook. And so the idea now was, instead of having a specialty spring, that the tension of the main material itself is giving that smash. The mash, as you will. So to get it on, you kind of press like this and hook it in there. And you can see quite secure once you get on. However, a downside is it's a lot of metal, it's a big piece, and so you get some of this action. So people will wrap them with elastic to settle that down, but also just where people are moving towards more lightweight options, it's become a little less popular these days. For quick release applications, this type of snap shackle can be pretty handy. So they work by pulling this pin, will release the hinge, and relatively easy to put on, like so. Once on, pretty secure. Just any sort of pulling this way will release it. So sometimes that happens on accident, and people want a little bit more security than that, so that's why they're not as popular these days. That said, if you do want an easy, quick release, they're pretty awesome for that. Blue Force Gear makes a pretty cool modular piece they call the U-Loop series, and it's secure, but also a good amount of modularity where you can pop it out here in the back and gotta wiggle it through. So that's pretty much impossible to do on accident. And I could go through here easy, or usually on most rails you can loop it through one way or another. This particular weapons rail is tight, but on a lot, usually plenty of room. But anyway, going to an easy example. So go through here, and we'll wiggle it back through. Snap it in place, and give it another tug to get everything where it's supposed to be. And you can see it's nice and flexible, a lot of rotation, relatively low noise compared to some of the other metals. Pretty cool option. QR swivels, standing for quick release, have been around for a while but still popular. Signs of newer models, they'll recess the button a bit, and so that way you prevent accidental release, but a good one you can still push in, then purposefully push and get it out without a big old hassle. While here notable the mount, which is separate from the swivel. These days usually they'll limit the rotation. That way if you go in indefinitely, it sounds good at first, but then it'll get all snagged up and no fun. But anyway, a nice practical option these days. When it comes to modularity and affordability, it's hard to beat the 550 cord. One thing to note while mounting is you don't want it touching the barrel or anything else that's going to get hot, because then it'll melt and fail. But showing a quick example, so there's a pretty good amount of gap space here. And one of the easiest is the overhand knot using 2 cords. I would say double overhand, but that's actually a different thing. So anyway, getting it started here, just do like so. Try not to jack it up, and then go in there. And I'm going to have a bunch of slack, and it depends how tight you want it, so you can just kind of push it down to get it to where you need it. And I just want a little loop, and so you want to push it in both ways. So push that knot down, push it up, and so that's pretty secure, and you only need just a little bit of slack. So if I was going to finish this off, call it final, cut off the ends, leave just a little 1/2 inch, or just don't want to get too rowdy close. And then use a simple lighter. Let's see here, and I just kind of go by them, and you just want them to get them melty. Don't have to go too crazy. Get them kind of dark and melted. You can get fancier than that, but that's good enough to last a pretty long time. And while we have some busted up 550 cord here, if you're not familiar, inside 550 are little other strands. And so you can take those out as needed, where if you need a real, you have a real thin slot to go through, you can take out all these strands. And so now you have a smashed, just a sheath. So that'll fit into even more places while still being pretty darn durable. While here, worth showing off positive locking cord, similar to 550, however, it's much more textured. So you feel the texture when grabbing it. As you can see here, it's more resistance on metal compared to 550. You get a lot more smooth sailing, depending on what you need. Other differences, the internals are more simplistic instead of a bunch of strands. And then kind of showing an example, so this would be like some janky knots I could fix up here, but about 18.5 inches will make a pull cord like this. So this could be applied to things we're going to do later. And I like this is a nice, about hand-sized grip, not too much snag zones in the middle, so it makes a nice option. Some people just do a straight shooter and then use heat shrinking tubing to close up that potential snag point in the middle. But in general, I don't recommend just the one loop, because at some point you're always going to end up with kind of this stuff, and this sucks. It's very avoidable. Just all you got to do, add another knot, and then how close you get it to your lash point, you want a little bit so you can get some flexibility, or you can really get it close if you want it to just kind of stick out. But I think this is way more optimal than you saw before. Now getting in there, making stuff happen. So some quick webbing notes that when you cut it and just don't do anything to it, it's eventually going to fray. So you're going to get this kind of meh, this type of stuff. You want to give it some sort of heat treatment while you work. So just give it a little love. Doesn't have to be too terribly messy. Just enough to seal those edges so you can work without a big old mess. As you can see here, I did a 45-ish degree cut, which can be handy if we're going to go through a whole lot of experimenting, going through a lot of notches. That can be handy, but it's a little bit harder to clean up later. For no-so securing fundamentals, usually the first thing that comes up is triglides. And so there's some polymer ones and some metal ones. The polymer ones are lighter, metal ones are lower profile, so some options. These particular ones have similar slots, but just for a little bit easier sliding, I'm going to use the polymer one here for an example. So let's say I want to attach Mr. Snap Hook, and how do I securely do that without sewing? So usually I'll prep it like so, and we want a decent amount of slack, and then we're going through the other side. Oh, fell out. Push it through. Alright, so now we have this, then we prep. We're going to come back over, redo our work. So now we got our HK, and then we're going to come back over. So like so, through the slots again, back the other way. Do one, and then two. Alright, and so you can see here, so it's medium security, where it'll probably stay for the most part as long as I don't move the tri-glide itself. Pulling this way is pretty stable. You could also do a secondary tri-glide, some folks do. Double it up, the just kind of general friction and resistance. But if you really want to do it up proper, you want to go back for a third time. And so you can see here, it's just barely. And at that point, usually you got to undo your work. It's the easiest way to do it without getting too complicated. Sometimes easier just to call it. So we'll give ourselves maybe this much more room, and then bring everything back down, and then start doing that stuff again. So we're going back for round 2. Back again. And gets this about in order. So it looks like it'll end up about there, about right, or we can even fudge it now that we can see our final stage. So now we got to figure out how to get it in there. Hopefully let the camera see. So we're going through this third time back and forth, back and forth. And so now you can see, say, as I mentioned earlier, if it's straight, it's a little visually cleaner, but this diagonal cut definitely helped us out while I'm fighting this camera view. But now with the third, so we've gone 3 times in this tri-glide, it is super secure, that's going nowhere. Next up in fundamentals, you're going to need some sort of a sizing adjustment. And the tri-glide sizer is one of the classic ways to do that. Basically, you're connecting to the middle bar, and then still using a wraparound like a tri-glide. So here's a starting point. If you go way out, you get a lot more length. So you can see that. And then when you go back in, you're essentially doubling up the material to make it shorter. So making a tri-glide slider from scratch, as I said, the idea is we're trying to connect to that middle bar. But we got to secure that too. So jumping ahead a little bit, I'm going to use a metal slider because it's lower profile. So this is kind of preloading them on there somewhere. Like so. Now we're going to get about our spacing. So we're trying to connect to that middle bar, see what we're dealing with here. And you want a little bit of gap space. You can maybe push it down just a smidge more. So you don't want the hardware banging into themselves. So now we're securing it. Now we're in the ballpark. And you can even go back for a third loop for your, depending on your security versus low profile concerns. Alright, so there's a good starting point though. Now we go back with the other end and treat it like a tri-glide. Like so. And back. Now, this side can go off to do great things, and the other side is our main adjuster loop. Another easy sling adjuster are LadderLocs. Now this goes off to connection point, but the main business. So if I pull here, that tightens and it won't release until, so I crank up here to get enough rotation. So now it'll allow movement. And as you can see here, I added as a bonus using a ladder lock and just wrap that slack as much as I could, where it makes like a little stopper. So it won't undo itself if I go too far. Recreating the setup, so we'll get our main back connector on other types of ladder locks. Sometimes there's just a big bar back here, but on this one, we're going to connect to this back bar. And we're not going over that too much, so I'm just pushing it back here and securing it one way or another. Yeah, good enough to show. Now, the other easy part, so you have your other adjuster, and just come in from the back, and then you're using this middle bar to go in on. So now you have your quick functionality, push back to release, pull the slack to tighten. A similar hardware option, but with more aggressive non-slip, is a spring-loaded cam buckle. Now, some manufacturers get a little weird with how they name this. Made the most sense to me because smashing into the webbing like this is cam style and it is spring-loaded. So for the basics, usually you'll connect to where a connection point on this side, and then you have webbing route through, so this will always be able to pass freely. But then when I try and pull the other one, it's very well stopped by these aggressive teeths constantly being pushed down by the spring load. So once I release that, however, it'll go in both directions, so I can go here or here. And while here, worth noting, so some people like to get creative with the pulls. So this shows off a tack toggle, which can be nice to get in there with the fingers. Decent balance on snag versus grabability. And this is just showing a quick tri-glide stop. So this loop could be way longer if one wanted to. And just a quick way where it jams up in there to prevent just pushing right out through the system. As a bonus round for those type of adjusters, you might want some sort of tail management at some point. So here's an example where I have a decent sized tail. And as you can see, when it goes through, it's not dangling going everywhere because I made this little pocket and some one wrap. And so that's nice, so the tail doesn't get into your mag well, snag on things, etc. So showing how I did it helps to go back a little bit here. So hopefully you can see, you're just going through, and then you make the tail length however you want it, going through the tri-glide to make the pocket, and then another tri-glide to secure it one way or another. I liked one wrap because I can take it on and off as I want, makes a good slide. If you want something even more compact, you could use just a classic loops or an in-between. The slick clip is interesting, so you can connect to the bottom side and have a quick release on the pocket side. So the main balance is you get the functionality of having this retention of your tail, but you do lose a little bit of adjustment space. Still a great option to consider. So for an alternate spring-loaded cam buckle setup, this way is without using a tail. So hopefully you can see here, connect in the back, and then just loop it around through the whole system back into the cam. So here's an example connection point, and then just goes through all the way however far your next connection point is. So this would be a tightening example, and then the loosening example. And it goes a little smoother when you actually have it on your body with tension, but that's the idea. They aren't as popular on slings these days, but SRBs, side release buckles, function similar to LadderLocs. So the core functionality is that you can release it in the middle, as seen on backpacks. But then this adjuster works very LadderLoc-like. So get no movement here, free movement while flat here, and then once you get enough angle rotation, you can get movement both ways. So, and some little hints on setup when you're all the way out here. So you can see these little friction notches, and that gives you little hints on how to go through. So first we're going to try and hit that middle bar, get some good contact, and then back over that middle bar. And just to confirm here, you can see that last friction zone. And that's how you set it up. This could As you saw on our LadderLocs, this could be some loops and getting fancy with pulls and all that stuff from here. Looking at other designs, this is the Frank Proctor Sling, and it just uses a real wide tri-glide where they connect to the middle. And then just the idea is to use hand pressure on the sides to adjust like we showed on a traditional tri-glide adjuster. Super simple. I'll look into getting more wide tri-glides, and then Blue Force Gears takes that and gets fancier where they've got their own custom hardware, and instead, so they attach to the end, loop through, and then have a middle bar for a pull tab. So that works like so. It's easier to see with tension, but you get the idea. Normally. So looking into recreating this slider functionality, I found some hardware that made do. So this is the ITW TLL 100 Travato, and it worked out where it's pretty flat and has low-key friction zones so it doesn't stab the wearer, because we're using it differently than intended. So there's a little demo, so it goes pretty smooth this way, and then the other way because we're fighting the adjustment loop, but still plenty reasonable, especially if it's worn as a sling. Now showing a little open it up here to recreate it, get an idea what we did. Alright, so we went connected to the back bar, and not necessarily supposed to, but we're showing that it's possible. And then we dodge this bar and go under it. So going under the main friction bar back out. So shooting out, and then we're having our pull tab connected to this main friction bar there. So all said and done. And especially for this setup, because it's not necessarily made for this, you want to use thin webbing. If you get thicker webbing, you're going to cause too much friction. All said and done, a pretty cool option to experiment with. It'll make more sense with worn demos, but as a heads up, so at some point you'll probably need some sort of loop spacer. Now this kind of represents going towards the shoulder side, so this could be like a shoulder pad or a simple tri-glide adjuster, whatever it might be, because depending on your setup here, which would say be your business, I'm going to do adjusting in my workspace zone. So if it goes all the way, the problem comes when you get into, say, like the curvature of your shoulder. So say now I've curved, and so now even though I can go this way, this one does not want to move at all. And so with that loop break, this will lay flatter where, say, this side's doing all that curvy business. So now you can still get your free flow both directions on your main adjustment. So if needing a little flex, shock cord around 3/16 inch I think is a good starting point, because trying to do no-sew elastic is pretty no fun on slings. So as you can see here, I mean, the bigger it is, the more it'll flex, and you can try and add multiple cords, but gets the job done, easy to replace. A overhand knot seems to work the best to me, like you can do square, but then you still have little sticking out points to manage. Sometimes you can sneak it into a pocket, kind of clean it up like this, and for the most part it'll stay. Get this look going on. So some options for you if you just need a little bit of flex. Getting into testing examples, so one of the first things to consider are your mounting points. And so I like around here, keeps things out away from my monkey stature, but some people like to really push it out there, which has its own pros and cons. Some quick examples. So when you have it like here, you can really wrap it in and get things tight, but I don't really like fighting how I'm going to grab it, whether or not the webbing's in the way. And then say if you're too tight and it comes reload time, and you end up doing like this stuff, look like the handyman. And so definitely something to consider, because it'll change everything up as you move along on your sling plan. And this sling just happens to be a classic where you have tail forward to tighten and then an adjuster back to loosen. And this tail isn't connected to anything, so you can see I can really crank it down, and not particularly in the way, like it goes off to a side usually, depends on how you space it. But this could just as easily be a spring-loaded cam buckle. It just happens to be a ladder lock at the moment. And that's kind of Viking Tactics made that one pretty popular. So you can go up, and then if you really need to crank it down, so I got this long boy, so I can really crank it, get everything tight, and then if you want to loose, grab that, get a nice quick release, and you just want to make sure it doesn't go too far back there, and that makes it hard to retrieve. But usually have a little bit of tail, not too hard to get back to. It's already, if it even twists up a little bit, still works out pretty good. In comparison to the opposite direction, so have a similar setup, but it's tail back to tighten, and then adjuster forward to loosen. And in this particular one, I've captured the tail, so it makes it a little bit trickier on like how far back you can go into your armpit before it gets uncomfortable, but you can see it gets reasonably tight, and then an easy release. This also becomes an example where you probably want to change the pull cord, so you want tail different than the pull, and your connection method so everything has a different feel. Now moving to friction sliders. So this particular one is a spring-loaded cam buckle where if you pull back to tighten and release forward to loosen. And I started it pretty tight, as you can see, but definitely notable that to pull back, you also kind of pull out like so. So it's almost like yanking and going a diagonal move. See, but it's much easier to release. It'll just go off on its own. But it's a little trickier. You almost like throw it back and let go, and it'll clamp down. But still pretty cool. And technically you have a whole lot of adjustment without any sort of tail. Showing the reverse example. So now we have forward to tighten and then back to release. And you can see it's a little trickier on the release. The forward's very consistent, but it's a unique pull diagonal back, and the strap will kind of fight itself, which is why I had to add a loop, because it'd be really fighting if I just went straight back to the mount point. But still something to consider, depending if you really like that forward to tighten. Does work nice. Just that release back can be a little tricky. Now, although I went over mostly 2-point slings, not to be forgotten, you can use these techniques for single-point slings. So here's just a quick example where I used a real simple tri-glide adjuster. That could be turned into a fancy slide adjust if you wanted. And the old double HK snap hook trick. And so you're mostly just getting enough room to change, and that's all you need. It can get creative from there, but usually you have less space to work with, so adjustment's a little harder. Now, a lot of companies out there make some pretty cool slings, but hopefully this video has been helpful in showing that just with some raw parts and no sewing at all, you can make a pretty cool sling. Thanks for watching. If you like this video and want to support us, please check out the MIL-SPEC Monkey Store. Although known for morale patches, we also specialize in a good selection of DIY hardware and tactical accessories.